So you're looking to buy a MIDI controller and you're wondering whether to buy a mini MIDI controller. Now for those of you who wants one answer without having to go through the rest of this video, do not buy a mini MIDI controller. They are more like a toy. They won't make you play very expressively, and there are all sorts of bunch of reasons why I wouldn't recommend you to buy a mini MIDI controller. But before we get into that, let's talk about what a MIDI controller really is. So a MIDI controller, musical instrument digital interface controller, essentially at its core no different than your computer keyboard that you use to type into your computer. All it does is it sends in data into your computer, and in this sense, your DAW, which is Logic Pro, Cubase, Reaper, and all those kind of softwares. So what happens is when you connect this guy up into your computer, hit a key, you're actually sending data, not music, not audio files, you're sending data into your computer, and the sound is normally generated by a sampler or a scene that is inside your DAW. So let me show you how to get started with a MIDI controller. It's very easy. Most MIDI controllers are plug and play, so meaning that you just have to connect a USB cable to your computer to a MIDI controller, and that's it. And the sound that you hear is basically, well, the instrument that I already have loaded in Logic Pro in there. I mean, we already have a lot of Bluetooth keyboards in the world, and essentially if they work the same, why aren't Bluetooth MIDI controllers popular? And the reason for that is because with a MIDI controller, we are sending a lot more data into the computer, and over a Bluetooth connection, there sometimes is latency. Although that latency is very minimal and you can barely hear it, but if you are a trained musician, you can actually hear that latency, that delay in your sound from the moment you trigger the keys and the moment you hear the sound, and that affects the ability to play. So now that I've explained what a MIDI controller is, let's get into the yes and no of whether you should buy a mini MIDI controller. So the first yes, if you are someone who travels a lot, if you're some sort of like a nomad music producer, then yes, a small size, compact MIDI controller really makes sense because you can put this in your bag, go anywhere, tuck it in your arm, and produce music anywhere you go. So that makes sense. Next, you probably want to buy a mini MIDI controller if you have a very compact space. You don't have much space in your room, you don't have much space in wherever you work, and you want something that fits in just nicely on your table, in front of your keyboard, in front of your desk. Doesn't take much space at all. A mini MIDI controller would make sense for you. Now, number 3, in my experience, I found that some sample instruments, especially those by native instruments, has something known as key switches. So what they do is basically when you trigger a key on your MIDI controller, you would also trigger a different sort of like arpeggio, a pattern, or a scale on the instrument that you're playing right now. If you are playing or programming with a main keyboard with a right or left hand, playing the melodies or playing the chords, it's nice to have a second MIDI controller sitting just there for you to do those key switches. So I have a guitar sample instrument loaded here, and my main controller is for playing the chords, and my second controller is for creating key switches. So for example, I'm going to switch around the key switches for different patterns. So So you can see this becomes very convenient for me to have two controllers, one controlling the key switches and one for playing the main melody and the chords. And finally, the fourth reason of saying yes to a mini MIDI controller is that it's a cool little toy. If you were to bring this to a nearby cafe and use it while you're there, produce some music outdoors, it would be a great conversation starter. People will start looking at you and say, hey, what is that? That looks like a cool little toy you have there. And this creates great conversations around what you do and also your music. So anyway, that's the 4 yeses I can think about the having a mini MIDI controller. I'm sorry, I think that's the only yeses I have. But yeah. Okay, so let's now get into the no's of why you shouldn't buy a mini MIDI controller. Now, being a pianist, right, I find it very limiting to play. And honestly, with a small little size key, you really can't do much with it. My fingers are definitely much bigger than what I'm used to on this keyboard. And basically, the more I play on this MIDI controller, the more I feel like I'm losing my dexterity. So this will be cool for you if you're a beat maker, you're just here to play a small melody to create a few beats, fine for you. But if you're a musician, I don't think you'll be very satisfied playing a smaller size keys, and also not to mention the smaller octaves. So as a pianist, I'm always playing like huge chords on the keys, right? With this, I can't be doing much here. Now, number 2, although MIDI controllers, whether they are small size like this or a full size, are touch sensitive, that means they respond to how hard you hit the keys, I find that smaller MIDI controllers are not as sensitive to that touch, basically. So if you're trying to play very expressively using a lot of dynamic soft and also loud, you'll find that using a MIDI controller, you will actually trigger louder notes than you want to. You can't be as expressive on it compared to a full-size MIDI controller. Now, I think this has to do with the key size and the balance that it gives you when you play. But that could be me because I'm trained as a pianist. I'm very used to playing the piano. I'm very used to playing full-size keys. It's harder to be expressive and to control my dynamics level on a MIDI controller, unfortunately. Now, I think having this guy around is fun. I had a lot of fun with it. It's like a nice little toy that I can bring anywhere. But if I think back of all the songs, all the music and all the production that I've created, most of them are produced and played on a full-size MIDI controller compared to a small form factor like this one. So I think that tells you a lot about whether you should buy a full-size one or a mini one. Now again, thank you for watching this video. I hope you found some value and your answer from this video. What are some yeses and some nos that I've missed out in this video? Let me know in the comment section down below. I'd love to hear from you. And again, it's nice to be creating videos again. I hope to see you in the next one.